of the session and welcome everyone for joining us today. This is our session, our first one that we're calling HR After Dark. And our session is about the state of the Black woman in corporate America. I am Veretta Yancey and the CEO of Man HR Consulting Group. And we are a full service outsourced provider that specializes in big ideas. The acronym for ideas is inclusion, diversity, equality, accessibility, and service. I'd like to say that I was in the D&I game before it was cool and race was included in the subject matters you didn't discuss at work along with politics and religion. I'm excited to have our panelists this evening who have a perspective on the Black women in corporate America, and they will share with you what you can do as leaders and employees to improve the situation in your workplace. We have so much to cover in such a short period of time, and I want to jump right into introductions. So first, we have Dr. Ayanna Webster. She's the corporate navigation and certified strengths coach with Winning Within and Associates Consultants. Ayanna, if you could just wave and say hi to everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for HR After Dark. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with everyone. So thank you for having me, Veretta.
Great. Thank you. Next, we have Darren Jackson. He's the CEO of All Black Creatives. Darren is making waves in the technology space, and as a millennial, which I was sharing with him before, I don't see that as a negative. That's a positive tone I have for millennials is they're visionary and they're optimistic, and I thought it would be great to include him on this panel tonight. Please welcome Darren.
Hello, I am super excited to be here, and thank you, Veretta, so much for having me.
Thank you. Our next panelist, she's no stranger to my followers, Janice Presley. She's an HR executive who's been both a moderator and also a panelist for the Building Series. She's aligned with my vision, thankfully, to be a resource for HR professionals. And that's really what this community is all about, is how can we support each other? And so I'm happy to have Janice with us.
Hi, everybody. Glad everybody's here. Look forward to a very lively conversation.
Great. So a couple of things that I want to mention. First of all, this session is being recorded and it's available to you. You'll be able to share on social media. We'll also look out for any comments or questions in the chat. We'll be addressing those as they come in. So please, we want you to be interactive. This really is about you. The Building Series that I mentioned earlier, we will have a session next week called Recruiting is a One Night Stand. And so this is a part 2 of our recruiting session that we did before. And then we'll be bringing back our SHRM Black chapter presidents again for the week following. Just so you know, this information that we provide, it's not considered to be legal advice. We encourage you to consult your legal counsel as it pertains to your unique situations. As we're discussing this article, please keep in mind also that this session is intended to be interactive. So we want to hear what you have to say. We want to hear your point of view. We also understand that there may be varied point of views, and that's okay. It's your choice if you want to add a comment, a question in the chat, or if you want to unmute your mic, raise your hand so that we can address you. So this is not a venting session, you guys. If people know me, they know I'm all about solutions. How can we solve the problems? And we want to leave here everybody feeling like they have a plan of action. So before we get into the live questions, I've given each of them a chance. I want to give each of them a chance to introduce themselves further and just provide a few comments about how this topic has impacted you. If we could go first with Dr. Webster, Yana.
Well, I'll share very apparently as a woman of color, a Black woman, especially when I saw the research that Lean In did with regard to the experience that Black women are having in the workplace, it definitely resonated with me as someone who runs a has worked for many years in corporate America. I identified with much of what I read, and I think for me, it's important that I'm able to have a conversation that denotes that I'm not crazy, right? And so my experience is what it is, and that it validated much of what I felt over the years of working in corporate America. And then also, I think for me, having a conversation like this, where we can, but also, as you said, Veretta, talk about solutions and how we as Black women, Black men navigate corporate culture, I think is very important. So I'm excited to be able to, one, validate that I'm not crazy, two, share some solutions, and then also share some experiences with other individuals.
Great. Darren, if you could go next.
Yeah. So the way that I guess like connecting to this topic very specifically. So I'm in a lot of different parts of corporate America pretty frequently. Probably like it was last year. I kept finding myself invited to specific events or to gatherings, mainly with just another group of like men, and we would just get together, and it usually just be outings, and we'd like cigars or something like that. We'd just be out and we'd talk about usually just a lot of different things, but then we start talking about like business, or we start talking about like opportunities in the workplace, opportunities within our own businesses. And then I started to realize, I guess pretty ignorantly, but like also at the same time, like pretty innocently, but like started to realize that as I was getting a lot of these older men who were kind of like having me into these spaces, started seeing like, I was like, yo, it's only men inside of all these spaces having these conversations about how we're going to ask for more money, or like what strategies we're going to use, or what resources that are available. So I started to ask, like, try or take some of that information and start delivering it to some of my peers. Most of my peers are actually women. And then I was just like, like, I don't feel like I'm going to stop having business conversations in spaces that women can't, as a way to try and like ally with some of the Black women in my community who I've been able to like work alongside, and then just challenge like more men to kind of bring that conversation that was happening at levels that maybe a lot of the women in my community weren't necessarily invited into, to start being able to have more of these type of conversations that could be more inclusive. So I'm really just trying to like learn more, and then just become like a better ally even inside of our own community. I feel like especially even more so now than ever, like seeing like how Black men, we have both like this like really weird like position in society, but then like whenever it comes into corporate America, we fit in spaces that especially like Black women don't. And so just trying to, we have at All Black Creatives, we just had 100 new members, for instance, sign up last week. Most of them work in corporate America, and 100. And so we're trying to like learn how to be about and support.
Thank you. And Janice.
I'm sure. So glad to be here. I'm Janice Presley. When I read this particular article, I felt like it was really just the surface. It was just kind of a surface look, because the things that they talk about are things that have been going on as long as I've been in corporate America, which is a really long time, but at least the last 50 or 60 years. And then I also feel like even though companies have tried to address this over the last 60 years or so, the efforts haven't been sustainable. So you've had organizations who've tried to address these issues, and then they stop, or they feel like they've done enough. But it's something that whatever program or plan that any company does, it needs to be sustainable. And then I was also reminded of one of my mentors wrote a book, and it's called 101 Ways to Know That You're Black in Corporate America. And she wrote this book back in 1998, and her name is Deborah Watts, W-A-T BTS if you want to get it. It's out on Amazon. And when she wrote this particular book back in 1988, one of the things that she did is she went to a lot of people and said, give me your story of how you knew you were Black in corporate America. So what it is really a compilation of different stories from different people out there. And Deborah now is the president of the Emmett Till Foundation. And so she's been still, doing advocacy for people of color, as long as I've known her. And what's most interesting is that all of those stories that I read about back in 1998, nothing has changed. So I guess it was just really a reminder for all of that really nothing has changed. Yeah, there may be a few more of us in corporate America, but there have also been a whole lot of people who've gotten out of corporate America for a variety of reasons, as noted in this particular article.
Thank you. So for those of you who didn't get a chance to read the article in its entirety, it was divided into two sections. One was the problems and one was the solutions. I was really surprised that as I was reading through, though, some of the solutions that they mentioned were some that I had been working on for years and working with other clients. And that's what we're going to mainly talk about today. One of the problems they talked about was just a representation, the number of African Americans just in the workplace, period. Support at work. Do you have, cheerleaders, basically? Everyday discrimination. So, we talk about those times when, you're in a meeting and, different people say things, the aggression and microaggression, and, those are, some of the more popular terms right now. But, many of us have become robotic, if you will, on the job, and we just kind of let those things, just keep moving. But then the other piece is, and to talk about, ambition as being a problem was interesting, mainly because we are ambitious people. I mean, every person that I know in the workplace, African American, they go hard, and very impressive, with their resume and their credentials. So before we get started, though, let's start with a poll. If you could bring your attention to the screen, and let's just get a poll for those of you who were able to read the article. What surprised you about the findings in the report? So let's just do that first. I'm sorry, let me put my glasses on so I can make sure that I get this right. So if you could answer yes or no, I was surprised about the findings in report, yes or no. The next question, my employer has put measures in place specifically to address disparities for Black people. That would be a yes, no, or I don't know. I'll give you a second to answer that one. The third question, my company has Black women on the leadership team. You could answer that yes, no, or I don't know. The fourth question or statement, my company put out a statement before or after George Floyd's incident and has taken action on the statement that they put out. So yes, no, or I don't know. And then finally, your fifth question statement, my company has a zero tolerance policy for racial discrimination. Yes, no, or I don't know. Want to give you 30 more seconds. Okay, 5 more seconds, and then we're gonna end the polling. Okay, here we go. Thank you for those of you who participated. I will share the results after we get through some of these questions. A lot of it, as you know, a lot of these findings, we already know. We've been in this, you know, in corporate America, and we know, you know, definitely from firsthand experiences, you know, what it's like to be a Black female in corporate America. So let's get down to the questions though. So I want to ask Dr. Webster. So we have data, right? We have, you know, the poll that we've taken, the report that came, or the article was based on surveys that they've taken from other companies. And we know that Black men and women are significantly underrepresented in leadership roles. And what you'll see is if they do have larger numbers of Black men and women, they're in the hourly and lower paying positions. So I found a graphic on a well-known company's website, and I'd like to share it with you. Let me share my screen here. Let me get this up and get your feedback about this particular slide here.
Okay.
This is me trying to, I'm on dual monitors here, so I'm multitasking. Are you able to see the slide here with the graphic on it?
Yes.
I am able to see it.
Okay, perfect. So when you look at that graph, I really like to hear your thoughts on how Blacks are not necessarily represented in those minority numbers.
Can you make it a slideshow view, please?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did it leave? Okay, let me make it up, blow it up this way. There we go.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so as I'm digesting this particular graphic from a well-known company, I assume who will remain nameless, So we do know that as a part of the research in the corporate America state of Black women, it talked a lot of representation, right? And how we are or are not represented at the leadership table. We're not represented as we think about professional development and having sponsors. And so when I think about Black women specifically, and I see the terminology minority, the first question I'm led to ask Veretta is, what exactly does this company mean minority numbers? Because we know that minorities can mean a lot of things. And I think as we think about what's happening in the corporate environment, or as we think about what's happening politically, socially, we're using this terminology minority to talk about a lot of things and a lot of people, and it means different individuals. So when I look at this particular graphic, immediately I question, who do we categorize in this company as a minority? Is that a Black woman? Is that a white woman? Is that a white gay male? Is it BIPOC? Is it BAM? I mean, what is it? Because again, as we think about all of these technologies that we use, what we do know is if we want to talk about Black representation, we have to call a thing a thing. And so this particular study that we're talking about tonight did really denote that Black women specifically are underrepresented. So we think about being a people manager or the senior leadership team. What I would challenge this particular company is to break those numbers down. So how many of the minorities, if you say that 18% minorities, who are those minorities? So how many of those are Black women? How many of those are Black men? Or how many of those are Hispanic or Latina or Latino? So that is what I would say. I think it's very easy for companies not to be transparent about the strides that are or are not being made. Janice talked about a book that was written in 1998. I wasn't even in the workforce in 1998, but to hear her say
Oh,
that we're still
thank
talking
you.
about
Thank you.
some. What did you say?
I said, thank you for that. Thank you.
What did you
Thank
say,
you for
Beretta?
sharing that.
I wasn't. I wasn't. But to hear that we're still, as a Black woman in corporate America, we're still talking again about some of the same things. It is disheartening. And while I'm not ignorant to know that these things have gone on for quite some time, what I would say about this graphic is, I would say to this company, who are those minorities? And tell me about the representation around those minorities. So specifically, we could be talking specifically about white women when we look at this. And so that is not wholly transparent around the representation in the leadership, individuals, people managers, any of the data that you see here. So that's what I would say to them.
Right. No, that's good stuff. And that's one of the points that I think is critical, that we do hold companies accountable, and we don't just listen to, some of the initial things that they say, but we really do a deep dive in the data. So Janice, I was actually looking at a website of another company, and this particular company took a stand against racism, and they posted their goals.
Mm-hmm.
But what I understand is that there's only about 7% of companies that actually set representation targets.
Mm-hmm.
We do recall, when we started talking about women in the workplace, there were targets that were made, and we see a significant increase in the number of women that are in, on corporate boards and corporate leadership positions. One of the solutions that they identified in this article is to share your metrics, share your goals. And, I always say what gets written gets done. And another thing that I say, though, is that people change their behavior when they don't like the consequences.
Right.
So as I want to show you a slide as well. My question to you as we look at this slide is, do you think they got it right? Did they represent their goals appropriately? And should performance bonuses be tied to the representation of the goals? Okay. So let me get the next slide that I have here. Me and these dual monitors, you guys bear with me. Here we go.
Okay.
So, did you
see it yet?
You have it? Okay.
We don't see it.
Oh, you don't see it. Okay, hold on. Let's see. There we go. Are you able to see it now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, let's see. So they have some statements here, but in my opinion, they're not necessarily SMART goals, meaning they're not specific, they're not measurable, they're not attainable, they're not relevant, and they're not time-based. So everybody's pretty much familiar with the term using a SMART goal. As far as being measurable, we're talking about how you show the progress. So there's really nothing on here that tells me that. And so what I would say to this company, as well as other companies, that if they're really serious about their diversity goals or their impact on women or Black women in specifically, that they would be a little bit more concrete about what the plan is. They'll also, what I would also say is begin with the end in mind. So if they really want to improve the racial and ethnic minority representation of senior levels in the organization, what does that look like? So for example, if there are, 20 people in leadership, is the goal to bring in half, 50%, 25%, and then how soon are they going to do it? Meaning that, is it going to take 6 months, a year, or whatever, but begin at the end and then put together a concrete plan on how you're going to get there. And then if you don't make it, there have to be some consequences around it. And so the other thing that I would also say is definitely have not only their executives, but also all levels of leadership or management tied to achieving those particular goals, whether it's bonuses, whether it's compensation, etc., and then make it so that it's sustainable. So I'm aware of an organization who had a goal of, a manager who had a goal of bringing in a high-level Black female into a role, but it was just so that he could get the bonus. And as soon as he got the bonus and she was there, basically all hell broke loose in terms of that employee's life, and she ended up leaving. But had that company actually put something in place that said, not only are you going to recruit, you're going to retain, which means that the culture, the environment, all of those things have to be acceptable for the person who want to stay and not feel like they are, being mistreated or anything like that during that. So it has to be something that's sustainable from a compensation standpoint for everybody, as well as the company has to be measured on either they made it or they didn't make it. And then if they're an organization with a board of directors, the board of directors also needs to be accountable. Because without that level of accountability, then no one is going to be successful.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. I recall working at an oil and gas company, and we had safety initiatives that were tied to the refinery. And so while I worked in an office, and the type of safety concerns that we had may have been a paper cut or tripping over a garbage can, we still held accountable if there was an injury in the refinery. And so that impacted our performance bonus. So they didn't just make that accountability for only those people in the refinery, but also held us to the same standard. And I think that's probably the key, the SMART goals piece. And I think what makes the SMART goals more effective is when you have a timely, so you're not just measuring it, so you don't just have the metric piece of it, but you are holding it to a time frame. And I think using maybe the employee resource groups or the multicultural diversity councils that are in organizations, having those groups to help define your goals, and not just saying these are goals, because I've said it many times, goals without a plan, without being smart, are dreams. And so nobody's tracking this, and to your point, it eventually goes away. It's no longer relevant anymore. Let's start to talk something else. So that's a really good point. I appreciate that. Let me go to the next question that I have. So Darren, I know you've been sitting there anxious to get in on what some of that, what we have to say. The focus right now is on Black women, right? We saw how Kamala Harris has come in on the ballot for the VP in the election. What we're not seeing though is how it's translating into corporate America, right? We saw how Trump came in from corporate America into politics, but we're not seeing that same representation of Black females in the as CEOs and Fortune 500. As a matter of fact, there's 0, right? So how is it that a Black woman can potentially be the president of the United States but that we don't have one leading a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah, I feel like obviously there's probably a lot of factors, but I think just off front is one side is we have the people have a voice that is valuable inside of like our public politics, where it seems like the only time we have a voice when it comes into corporate America is through Black Twitter. And so, and when we're trying to like cancel somebody or shut somebody down. And so, and to be honest, like there's like this like back end invisible structure for placements of executives within our current economic ecosystem of leadership. So we have these like search firms, executive search firms that are typically the majority of them are and the top ones are all like white men, and then they're typically contracted through investment agencies or investment firms whenever it comes to like top level like this. And investors will bring in these search services, and these search services will go through their Rolodex of people, and they'll really start to recruit and screen people based off of who they feel like fits the culture of that company. And they're looking for people who will be good culture fits versus who would actually be a winning player on that team. And I think it's actually, it's biting them really hard. I mean, it's really crushing them in a lot of ways. Like they're suffering. Not only are we suffering, but like they're suffering also. Part of how they're suffering is they're bringing in all of these people who essentially are replaceable, to be honest, right? They fit the culture. So that means that they can find somebody else to fit the culture if that person doesn't work out. Where a lot of times, like whenever, if you were to hire a Black woman to go into that place, it would be a culture ad. And then there would be there would be a shift that would happen naturally within that company in a very beautiful way that we've seen statistically in the companies that have done it. But typically the issue is that like, I mean, and to be honest, like they're grooming people for these jobs. Like they're taking they know exactly, like depending on what school you go through, and then they'll like you hear about these random private schools, or not even to mention like Harvard and all these, but like you look at these like random private schools that most of these schools were funded by slave endowment money also, which is a whole other thing. So you have these like families that like have like funded these schools, and then their kids go to these schools, and then through these schools they get these specific type of internships, schools that we may have never even heard of or that are very popular. These schools that are extremely hard to get into basically. And then they go through these internships that pretty much no one even knows about. They get mentorship by their uncles or whoever it is. And then they get drafted into this pipeline that takes them directly at the top of these companies. And so not only is it really difficult for people who don't come from, because we've been super disenfranchised for ever. And so since we came here, and then and our starting place is so far back. Then whenever it comes to it, we don't have the mentors, we don't have the partnerships, we don't even know what the right schools are to go to. And so all of these different things, I think, add in like factors and components where the beauty of what we're starting to see, I think the shift in culture, and it'll continue to happen, hopefully, if we're continue to put the pressure on these companies, is that we're demanding that leaders' voices be heard. And that our people are leading the companies from companies that we're shopping from, and so, or partnering with, or however we're being serviced by these companies. But there's, to be honest, so many of this back end invisible structure that it's just really, really messy when you get into it. And then if you are moving up the pipeline, typically you get into like a manager role, and there's a ceiling, and they'll send you to go back to some school, a school that you probably wasn't the right internship for, and like that you wouldn't get the right internship from. And then you start the process all over again when they know exactly where to go, exactly who to talk to, and then get placed directly inside of these jobs. And so not only is it hard, obviously, for women in general, but especially for Black women. I mean, it's just like layer after layer after layer, it seems like, whenever it comes to trying to like find people to fill these roles. And the issue, and then I'll be done, but the part of the issue is like, and what's unfortunate is like, it's keeping us from a lot of wealth, obviously, from our communities and from being able to have this like opportunity for redistribution. But then it also closes the doors for all the people who are trying to come up from the bottom, and it makes it so that this culture is still kind of the same, and it kind of remains the same. So therefore, it just continues the cycle over and over and over again.
No, you're exactly right, and it's a system that we've been talking about. It's the constructs and how, and every layer is built on another form of discrimination, another type of it. Let's see if we have some comments in our chat. So here we go. This one was talking about the goals. So this is with Janice. They said tying those goals to their pockets tends to change the behavior, and we actually see things get done as long as it's strictly enforced. So Ayana agreed to that. Yes, that is true.
Marlon McWilson, lower member.
Oh goodness. Okay. Here we go from Carol. Many organizations do not attach measurable racial equity and inclusion goals. As a VP of HR, I've noticed that this is a culture shift that is talked about but not necessarily implemented. And I definitely agree with it, and especially using the word equity, because equity is not parity or equality. It's another way to talk about fairness, and those goals, and what I said earlier when we first started this conversation, race wasn't even a discussion. You didn't even talk about race in the workplace. Race was, aligned to politics and religion, and nobody talked about it. So it's great that we're at that place, that we're starting to have the discussion, but people have to really be bold and tough and stand up. I was looking at an article, actually it was I don't know if it was Good Morning America or something this morning, and we had Gabrielle Union on there. And they had asked her a question, obviously she was discriminated against, and she filed a lawsuit against the company. And they asked her about it, about that lawsuit. And she said, and basically what they were trying to say is, there's been a lot of change, a lot of movement, lots of things are happening. And I loved her response, because she said, for those of us who've been waiting and been in this space for a long time, it's still moving at a snail's pace, for everyone else who did not have the benefit of even realizing, right? You had a certain amount of privilege that you didn't even have to, acknowledge that this was going on behind the scenes, especially in the workplace. For them, it's like, they're facing this, cancel culture and, all this, just, I guess this in your face kind of conversation that they haven't had before. And so I definitely appreciate that she said that. But the other point that I want to make is Jide Zeitlin. He was one of the 4 Black CEOs that they identified with the Fortune 500 companies, and he recently resigned. So I'm not sure if anybody saw, but a couple months ago, I remember him making a statement around tapestry and, what they aligned, how they were aligned, and, they weren't going to have any prejudice or discrimination. And then mysteriously, after they did that investigation on him, he submitted a letter of resignation. So we definitely have to, think about those things too, and the ramifications of when we do race issues in the workplace. Janice, so we've been talking about opportunity and perception and how companies have SMART goals that are lined up. I'd like for you to share some of the tangible things. I think a lot of us have, we know about it, but how crucial is it to be at the table? How do we get people, leaders, to invite others to the table, but how do we get employees to say, I want to make sure that I am at the table, that I'm clarifying any perceptions about their willingness or their availability to take on, what we sometimes call stretch assignments?
Sure. So one of the things that Darren was talking about, I'm going to label it as privilege. So I am not a person of privilege. I've been in this corporate America game about 35 years. So I've seen it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I will tell you that some of the mistakes that I made coming into my first role, the questions that I asked, I should have been walking on eggshells when I came into corporate America, but I wasn't, because I was a millennial young at the time. And so I made some mistakes. And some of the mistakes really had to do with my inability or not wanting to try something new, or feeling like I had nothing to relate to my coworkers. The coworkers are probably twice my age and older. So I did not do enough as a young person coming into corporate America to be a part of the team. I kept waiting for them to bring me in, and they did not. And I should have brought myself in by participating in other stuff. And stuff could be anything from, there's a team lunch, a team dinner. I remember being invited to my boss's daughter's wedding. Didn't know the girl from a can of paint, but I was invited to go to this wedding. The only person of color at the wedding. And so those are the things where when I got to the wedding, it was all the coworkers were there, all the other leaders in the organization were there. And so even though it was a wedding, there were still people there networking, talking about work, all the conversations, et cetera, et cetera. So I think a lot of times we miss those things because we don't want to be the quote unquote only. So we don't go, or we make up an excuse about why we don't want to participate. But I call it taking one for the team. And so I know I've been invited to some of everything: bar mitzvahs, like I said, weddings, house parties, and different things like that, because again, the conversation is going to always continue. Now, what you do when you get there, of course, you cannot be drunk and drinking and all the other stuff. You gotta stay sober. And because many a person, of course, has lost their job from, inappropriate behavior at an off-site event, whether it was work related or not. But I think if you're on the manager side, that's a whole different thing. I think managers need to do more, or leaders need to do more to bring those people who are not like them into the fold and then also eliminating some of the things that basically should not matter, but they do, if that makes sense. So I know one of the conversations that I was having with a friend, I spent about 12 years with the organization. And I remember when I first started with that organization, I was overweight. And so one of the goals that I had my first year in is that I wanted to lose weight. And I ended up losing a significant amount of weight. So after I lost weight, I noticed that people treated me very differently than the way that they treated me when I was overweight. I didn't do anything different. I didn't talk different. I didn't do my work any different. But I feel like in corporate America, especially for Black women, we're kind of on the bottom of the totem pole. And in order for us to be a part of the totem pole, we have to do a lot of things to make us relatable to other people. Such that people can see us in the role, because again, it's about perception. And unfortunately, the things that happen to us are very subjective. And so, having had to navigate this path, whether it's right or wrong, it's just, about the opportunity. And so one of the other things that I noticed is that my non-Black female peers seem to get assigned to the best accounts, seem to always have the best ratings or whatever. And it wasn't that their work was better than mine. It was because of what they look like. It was perception. So,
Right.
in terms of how you dress, how you act, how you participate or how you don't participate, all of those things seem to come into play at work. And then for me, I started out as an engineer. So as an engineer, all of my male colleagues, because I happen to always be the only female, will be like, hey, we're going out for a beer, you want to go? And I'm like, I don't want to be hanging out in a bar with a bunch of guys. I don't want to go to the golf course with a bunch of guys. And again, that's why I said those were some of the mistakes I made. Just because you go to a bar didn't mean that you had to drink. You just needed to be there for the conversation. Just like for the golf course, I didn't even have to pay. I could have driven the golf cart around the course and never ever done any of that stuff. But those are the things that I think that kind of make us be out of sight, out of mind, if you call it that. You're not there, you're not at the table, no one can see you because you don't participate, and then you get labeled, oh, this person is antisocial. Oh, she's just antisocial. She don't want to be bothered with us. And so again, like I said, having been in this is like year number 36 for me. Been in corporate America a very, very long time, but again, it is what it is. I'm hoping that over the next time that we're not looking back to 1998 in this book, 101 Ways That You Know You're Black in Corporate America 20 years from now. I have hope, but again, it just hasn't been my own particular reality.
No, that's good. And I think when you talk about perception, I mean, there's some things that we can control, and then there's some things that we just can't control. And I remember two of my very best friends, both of them are in the C-suite in their organizations, Fortune 500 organizations, and neither one of them are married, nor do they have children. And so that's one of the things that we often see, and that was one of the things, obviously, when they started talking about gender and how women get impacted because they have families and they have responsibilities. And fortunately, when I was working at the oil and gas company, one of my benefits was a chauffeur service for my daughter who was a ice skater. And so literally they would come and pick her up. A limo service that the company provided would come and pick her up from school every day at 1:30 and take her to the skating rink. And so that was their way of saying, we want Veretta here. We want her here in the office. And we've seen this. I mean, other companies that I work for, they provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner because they don't want you to leave. They want you to stay there and work, right? So you have to find a balance, but you got to get yourself positioned. There were times when, especially when I lived in Chicago, the traffic. So I would leave work at 3 o'clock, but I always made sure that they understood I'm leaving here at 3, but when I get home, I'm going to make sure that I'm checking my email, checking voicemail. I'm available to do whatever assignment that I need to complete, by the end of that day, if that was necessary. So again, it's only so much that we can do, right?
Right.
So Ayana, let's talk about.
Hold on, there's a couple things in the chat.
Oh, okay. Yes, let's go ahead. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
One of the people says, I tend to be antisocial and lack the energy to even go to Black events. Imagine the effort it takes for me to go to work events being the only Black person, but I do it so that I can keep up and belong. So been there, done that, have that t-shirt.
We wear that t-shirt proudly.
I wear it very,
Introvert
very proudly.
here.
Yes, I know. And I'm definitely the introvert that leads the very extroverted life. So I get it. But you have to do what you have to do. One of the mottos from my university is find a way or make one. So I've made lots of ways. And then the other thing too is that, I feel like at work, a lot of times I have to be an actress or an actor, and basically be someone that I'm not, just to, socialize and talk to people, because that's not my natural nature, because I don't want to do it. But again, I know that those are the things that, it's about being relatable and likable, because what you don't want to be is when there is a time where people are going to be, laid off, terminated, let go, or whatever, one of the ways that you can keep your name off of that list is by being relatable to other people, that they like you, they know you, et cetera, and you can be like, I hate these people because they're crazy or whatever it is. But I know that likability is number one for most people, especially for other people who are in decision making. If it comes down to the person that they like or the antisocial Black person, guess who's going to be the first to go?
Or that they know.
Right.
And I just have to jump in here, because for me, and it could be generational, or it could be by the nature of the type of work that I do, which is about coaching authenticity, helping individuals to really show up as who they are. I think oftentimes I do hear a conversation where Black people have to show up and be something perhaps that they're not in order to be liked. And, I just don't know if that's true. I don't necessarily believe that. I think when I talk to my Black female friends about working from home even today, 9 out of 10 of them say, I'm glad that I'm not there because I don't want to be an actress. I'm open in my own space. And I don't need the interaction. And so I think the way I've been able to navigate corporate America as someone who is an ambivert, so I can do either, I can do extrovert, introvert, is by expressing my intent. So let me share with you what my intent is, and how I operate, and what makes me tick and what gives me energy. And with that, I personally have been able to navigate corporate America without going to all of the things, and being very well liked, and being able to move wherever I wanted to move without playing the game, if you will. And so I think we all have choices that we have to make, but I don't necessarily think that we have to tell Black employees that you have to do these things in order to make it. I understand that there are some of us who will choose to do them, but I don't think that you have to, especially if that's not who and how you are, as long as you're able to have some very transparent conversations about your intent. So the people that I work with and have worked with in the past, they know that my family is going to come first. Right. And so I think those transparent conversations, even today, as the workforce is changing, we will never go back to what the workforce was prior to COVID. And so this is an opportunity for Black people specifically who, if we look at our HR POC page, who are saying, I'm glad that I'm not there because I'm pretending. I'm laughing at jokes that I don't want to laugh at. I'm going to things that I don't want to. That doesn't mean that I'm not performing well, but what that means is there's some authentic conversations that need to be had around how you show up to work, and people need to be able to understand that so that they can be okay with that, and you don't have to change who you are. So I'm in a different space around that.
Oh yeah, and I totally agree with you, because the thing is that every environment is different, every person is different, and you have to make a decision. Like I had a guy friend of mine, we worked for IBM together for a long time, and one of the things that I left IBM, he stayed there, and this is during the time when IBM was very conservative, that as a woman you did not wear pants, you wore a white shirt, navy blue skirt suit every day. We looked like little robots walking around there. And then one day I saw a picture of him, and he had grown dreads down his back. And I like gasped, and I'm like, what happened? He said, look, I went to my manager. I talked to him about my career. Basically, my manager told me, you're not going anywhere. So he was like, whatever, I'm gonna do what I want to do. And he grew the dreads. So, but then that's a decision. That's a decision that you make. And I'm not saying that, but he made the decision consciously. It wasn't that he fell into the decision or anything. And I think if you want to be in corporate America, you have to decide how you're going to proceed. For some people, it works. For some people, it doesn't work. And so for me, one of the things that I knew that was quote unquote holding me back in the company that I was at was I was overweight. So when I looked at the other women in my organization who were in leadership positions, I'm tall. They were all tall and thin. And the moment I became tall and thin, guess what happened? I got promoted. Not that I did anything different, not that I said anything different, but it's just the perception of the organization. And again, every organization is different. Every set of people is different, but just knowing where you are and what you want to do to advance your career or not advance your career. And again, if that's not the right place, then guess what? There's other jobs out there. Go work for somebody else that will, accept. So I get it. And again, of course, I'm a little bit older than you anyway. And so that's just the hoop that I have had to jump through, being in this for a really long time. And then again, when I think about it, in my family, I'm the very first person in my family to work in corporate America. And now 35 years later, there is no one in my entire family. Why? And if I ask my children, that's one of the things they'll say. We saw all the hoops and stuff that you jumped through, and you're not willing to do it. It is
Well,
what
but
it
you know, so let me say this part. First of all, I really appreciate this dialogue, and that was one of the things that I think that you know, one of the points that I make, especially to my clients, is we are not the same. We don't all agree.
Oh yeah.
We are very different within our own community. We have very perspectives there. You know, Janice, I'm old school with Janice, so we came through this, you know, code shifting space, code switching, where you basically adjusted yourself. You were chameleon-like, right?
Yeah.
You adjusted yourself to the environment.
You became a fit.
So I didn't do baby talk on the job, right? Nor did I, you know, do corporate speak, you know, to my kids to some degree. Is it when they got older, I definitely did. I wanted them to be comfortable in this space. So I think that, you know, it's one thing that we can say this, and we can say, you know, to Ayana's point around, you know, owning things. And I think having a coach is critical, because it does help you get through to that space, to where you really are confident and you own what you do, and are accountable for what you do. The reservation that I have is, even being in my own, having my own business, is that I still have to get clients. And so anything that I can do to try to reduce the distraction, I'll do. And I had talked to Ayana earlier that I had flat ironed my hair for this important client meeting, and, you know, put on a suit and did all of this. And I didn't get the bid on that one. And it was, you know, definitely very disappointing. But as soon as that was over, I went back to braids, right? And so it's, you have to do what you're comfortable with. And, you know, it's interesting, because I was on another panel a few months ago, and somebody said, all money isn't good money. So I really want to, you know, extend that conversation and understand what that meant, because this client was very uptight, and I believe that they were somebody who's equally, you know, as uptight, and they didn't, you know, they didn't hire my business. So let's move on, and then we'll answer some other questions that we have in the chat. So we were talking about, you know, Black women facing day-to-day discrimination and being held accountable. So when we think about the process and the maturity that it takes for companies to get to implement that zero tolerance for racial discrimination, I want to hear what you have to say about this, Ayana. What is it that companies, you know, what are their, I don't know, you know, I don't want to just come out and say that they can't do this alone, that they need a consultant, but I kind of want to say that. I honestly, they're not equipped internally to do this type of work, because there is a change management piece. But you know, the Me Too movement did it, right? You know, they understood women's rights and women's, the women's movement, and they made some remarkable decisions, right? Zero tolerance for, you know, any type of sexual, you know, conversations or anything that's inappropriate. You know, they shut it down. So do you see something like that for racial discrimination? Do you see a company getting to that point?
Well,
And this is
again, I certainly, to me, okay, well, I certainly hope so. Again, I think back to what opening statements, what Janice said, and I would think in 2020, we would be like Nike, we would just do it. So if we've talked about all of the problems and the solutions around ensuring equity for for Black people in corporate America. And we know all of the things that we should do, we just don't do them. We would just be able to do it. I personally have an experience where 5 years ago, as you think about racial reckoning and having a policy that is zero tolerance for racism, where I led a group of about 6 Black women at a corporation where we sued because of racial discrimination. And my senior, and because there was no real stated policy around racial discrimination, and we were on a daily basis at the hands of the CEO experiencing racial discrimination, myself after this company and say, we will not take this. About 12 years ago, I think it was. When you think about the Me Too movement, we're in this age of social media, right? Where these companies and these individuals, these high profile companies and individuals were put on blast, if you will. And so when you are being tried in the media, or whether that be television media, social media, there is this intense pressure, if you will, to do something and to act. The situation that I spoke of, it was a small corporation, and the company themselves did not want to do anything about it. So we went to their executive board in order to get something to happen. If this situation had occurred during the time of social media, and this is a national organization that I was a part of, and we were able to use a platform like social cancel culture, I don't think we would have had to seek out an attorney. I don't think that we would have had to go to be able to have a workplace that was free from discrimination. I say all that to say the Me Too movement, different time, different era. I personally think that we can get there. I'm optimistic and Leanna in that way, to believe that we can get there. What we've seen over the last, since the killing of George Floyd, I don't think we're there yet. And I think to have to say that is really sad. I think we're at a heightened moment where we're recognizing in corporate America, we can take that situation and say, we have all of these disparities that are happening that are similar or akin to what is happening with economics or health or housing or our public education. All of the disparities, they're happening in corporate America, and racial discrimination exists here as well. But what I think is, we've started to see some individuals in larger companies resign. We've started to see, you think about even a company like Ebony, where, was it Ebony or Essence, where all of their employees got together, and we're being discriminated against. So I think it's going to take this continued movement of individuals who are willing to stand up and say and demand change and hold people accountable externally and publicly. Internally, companies can do very simple things that, again, I think Janice already alluded to. We know that companies need to have policies that are explicitly stated that racial discrimination will not be tolerated. They need to train their managers and their staff. They need to create a process to be able to report. In the company that I mentioned that I was a part of, where I had the issue, process to report. And in fact, the HR person said, I don't want to have anything to be an external person or someone that is outside of HR. Companies need to investigate swiftly and take action and hold employees and leaders accountable and make sure that all of those investigations are closed out. So we know that there are things that can do. It's will they do them, Beretta, and at what cost, and why will they do them in order to ensure that racial discrimination does not in corporate America. So I'm hopeful. I don't think we're there yet.
Let me take a look at what we have going on here in our chat. So Christina, the company should use forfeited bonus dollars to fund the ERGs and promote economic equity. I think that that's a good start to utilize the ERGs. For those of you who may not be familiar with that term, it's the Employee Resource Group. Sometimes companies will call it networks, or, but it's basically affinity groups with people who have who are similar, whether it's from their race, whether it's a veteran, whether they have disabilities. and those groups get together. And when I formed an ERG years ago, one of our goals was to show the organization that we could contribute, that we could contribute to their bottom line. And so we put a charter together and really formalized that group and had great traction. And so I do see an opportunity to do that, but I also see an opportunity to utilize groups or companies, external companies, to help grow the ERG and help the ERG get focused. Let's see, I tend to be antisocial and like the energy. I think we talked about that one already. How do companies really hold themselves accountable for these inclusion and equity goals? Oftentimes, unless federal dollars are at stake and specific goals are required to be met in these programs, only exist with organization and not always reality. Now, it's interesting about this comment, because I have read an article, and I think, was it you, Janice, that posted our article in the HR group on Facebook, where they mentioned that President Trump was banning any type of cultural sensitivity training or any of that type of thing in federal organizations. And
Right.
so that's huge, I think, to take that stand and say that, that if you're pro-Black, that means you're anti everybody else.
Absolutely.
And so that's unfortunate that we've gotten there. And I think that that's a whole nother conversation. I mean, I'm gonna hold that.
But even with that, I mean, if you think about it, so you have the President of the United States, and I know this is not a political conversation, who has basically said that any kind of training or conversation around diversity, inclusion is anti-American, is pretty much what he said. But then you have corporations that have already started this. Like here in the state of California, it is a requirement that every manager and every employee have some kind of training around diversity, around harassment, discrimination, all of those things. It's a requirement. And so now you've got the president saying that it's anti. So again, it's ridiculous to me, and it's going to be interesting to see, especially a lot of the leaders who are Trump supporters, leaders of corporations. Are they going to stop all the things that they've been doing as a corporation because the president said, if that makes sense? Almost like Simon said, don't do training. So
yeah.
it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. So let's shift a little bit. I want to get back to Darren. So Darren, of course, I've called you out as being a millennial. And, as you can hear through our conversations, that we definitely have, a wide range of views as it relates to how we assimilate, I guess is probably the right word, in an organization. So what do you think now, when you look at, maybe the way your grandparents navigated the workplace or your parents, what do you think that's different now about seizing the opportunity as you're rubbing shoulders with the who's in the technology space?
Yeah, I think now more than ever, especially because of the technology space opening and growing and growing and growing, we have more options than we ever have. And it's also like a generational kind of this shift. I don't like to say a shift, because it's not as if previous generations didn't also think like this, but I would say of how we've aligned ourselves in the stance, like Ayana was saying, that like a lot of people are willing to take. Deloitte did a study that says 61% of millennials won't consider working for your company if you don't have a commitment to your community. And even more so, if you look at it, like Gen Z is over 73% for the same study. So we're seeing like the trends are starting to go in our favor, that you have to have a commitment to community. You have to have a commitment to inclusion in order for people to want to work with you. And why that's important is because right now, so for instance, in like the technology space, we have over 700,000 jobs open right now, just open. And by 2025, we'll have by 2025, we'll have over 2.3 million jobs open in that same space. And so being trained and like developed into that space. And so I think options really do create a weight that we have that a lot of other generations didn't necessarily have. We don't have to go to school to be able to access these jobs. We can literally just go online and sign up for a coding boot camp, and you can be placed in a job within 6 months. There's also, now we're gonna see a lot more work from home culture going on. So people are gonna have just even more than ever, I would say, is like my parents and my grandparents did not have options. And options is wealth. Options is like money is only value is because it creates more options. Having more time is valuable because you have more options. So like now for us, our generation, and in some ways, obviously, are more debt, but we're willing to go in debt to see change. And I would say that that's a huge thing too. We're not willing to just take a check and I'm not like, and obviously I'm not like throwing shade or like judging other generations. I think that we have, like I said, because of the internet, I mean, I could go online right now and get a job tomorrow and live in Mexico and make 10 times more than my living expenses and live all around the world. And that's what's happening. We're seeing that happen especially with our generation, with millennials. And so Gen Z is starting to kind of take on the same type of trend. They're demanding that their companies have some type of commitment to the community, especially environmental. But in the wake of George Floyd, and like you said, Beretta, earlier with the Me Too movement, we really are, there's just this like real push to get companies to really bend to us. And since we're the consumers and becoming more of the consumers and becoming more of the influencers, Black millennials are the number 1 digital influencers online. So we have a lot of power just through our words online. And so I think that we're learning how to leverage our weight for the first time. And because Black people especially are powerful when we come together. And most of the things that have been put in place, even this, I think this like the way that we've been removed from these executive roles and the way we've been removed from these management roles, they only put a couple of us inside of these spaces. I think it's again to like do this like separation of us. And because of the internet, because of social media, and because of the way especially millennials have like manipulated social media to work on our behalf, we're seeing what the Black voice can do as a one voice, and what we look like as like a collective. And like, as I'm seeing a company, as you're seeing companies get called out on social media, I talked to a lot of these companies. Literally today I talked to Airbnb and Adobe. So like, I'm like in these meetings all the time with these companies, and some of these companies have been put out on blast recently, and really on blast. But as we're like talking to these companies, we're like, you're not put on blast by customers. Most of the time, you're not being put on blast by customers. You're being put on blast by that social media intern you just never like that you discriminated against. You're being put on blast by the people who work internally inside of your company that you never gave a voice to. And so like, we're willing to not shop with you because of the way you treated someone who works for you. And you're not used to that because you're used to treating people who you pay like their property. But we say, nah, like we're not your property. And we will like leverage our collective to like withhold from you. And so like, I think it's now, whenever you walk in as like an entry-level person into one of these companies, you have a voice. You know that you could go on Facebook tomorrow and say, I was mistreated by this major company, and that there will be thousands of people to come behind you as one isolated person to say, this is not okay. And we demand that you apologize and make up for this before we ever spend another dollar with you, or before we ever use your platform again. And so I think it's like this really beautiful moment where like our like parents and our grandparents just did not have the ability to be as connected as we are, that it sounds like from just what Janice was saying, very isolating and very and very remote. And we're still the only Black people in most rooms. Okay. Like
Right.
I still show up and I'm the only Black person in a lot of these spaces. But at the same time, I don't feel alone when I open up my Instagram. Okay. And so like,
Exactly.
so it just changed, you know, it's just like a whole different world. And I think that what we will see happen is, especially now that people will be working more from homes and all of these things, that our collective, our community will begin to gather again, and we'll be able to see our light and all the things that really were removed from us. And I think a lot of people are thinking like, oh yeah, they're just thinking about the economic value that it's going to have for them. But all I can think about is like the collective and community value that that's going to have for us. Like I could be working and living and sharing all this time and space with my neighbors who are also Black or people of color. So I think that it's like a beautiful time. I think it's like transition, but I think because there's this like collective influence, this collective peer pressure to say, no, don't work for a company. There's another study that was put out, and I wish I can remember who did the study, but basically millennials, if you fire a Black millennial, they're 25% of the time, which is huge because it's already hard for you to hire Black people. There are only, so for instance, like in the tech world, there are only 318 Black designers in the entire workforce, according to Design Census, right? And that's like starts off at $90,000 a year in jobs as like entry level. So like, so there are only 318 of us. So there's like a statistic that says like Black millennials will 25% of the time tell people not to work for you if they had a bad experience working for you. Okay.
Absolutely.
Like that is horrible. Like that is like 25% may not seem like a lot, but it's a lot. And so like we will shut it down, and like you will be like, oh, well, we're trying to find, like Black people would not go work for you if other Black people had a bad experience. Millennials already jump from job to job to job like every other day. And so like it is like hard to keep people already. And then as soon as like, you know, and not to get like overly political, but like, you know, I was in St. Louis when Mike Brown was killed, and we had this Black Lives Matter movement during that time. And what we didn't have during that time was like white allies for real. And so now what you're seeing is like white people are following the Black voice in these things. So Black people are like, yo, I'm not going to work for you. In 10 years, they're going to do the same type of study and say, well, Black people say that they don't want to work for you. Nobody wants to work for you. And so I think it's just going to become more and more beautiful to see what our collective power does. And I think that as millennials, we really are the recipients and beneficiaries of like of technology, and we're utilizing it to our strengths. I don't think that generations before us even had that same type of opportunity or privilege, the generational privilege that we have.
You know, I really appreciate your perspective. I actually wanted to share just a snippet of a movie that I watched a few years ago. And this movie was based on a true story. And they referred to a high school that I graduated from that was segregated at the time and how they integrated that school. And so I'd like to share just a snippet. It's 3 minutes, which is long for a video, but I think getting to the end point drives home what we need in corporate America. So let me just share this with you. What's going on here? Okay, let me get my glasses on. Why isn't this working? My screen just froze. 1 second here.
You don't hear the volume.
Okay, 1 second. Can you hear it at all or no?
No,
Is it just low? Okay.
it's not on at all. You have to share your sound.
Right. So why did that? 1 second. Are you able to hear it now?
No.
Okay. I am not sure why that's not, why you can't hear the sound on it. Okay, well, that was a epic fail here. This was where I was having, so Hidden Figures, if you're not familiar with that, that movie, it was based on a true story in Hampton, Virginia, NASA, Langley Air Force Base, that area where I actually grew up from or grew up in. And they have a scene in here where Taraji is playing, I believe, Miss Johnson, and she's a mathematical genius inside of the workplace. And she's there, of course, as the only woman of color, pretty much as the only woman. I think it was maybe one other woman there. And in that scene, you find it throughout the movie, you're finding her leaving to go to the restroom because the restroom for the colored people is not in the same building. And so what happens is that at some point they're starting to get, at a crucial point in their research, and they're trying to, develop this product, and she keeps leaving. And so he gets, her boss gets, so upset about it, why are you leaving? And then, that's when she has her breakdown. And I don't know if any of you have had an actual breakdown inside of the office. I have, I'll raise my hand to that. But she had her breakdown and she's like, look, I'm having to leave and go, a half a mile out just to go to the restroom. And on this particular day, I believe it was pouring raining. And so here it is, she's coming in and she has this rain, she's hair dripping and all of that. And when she says to him, I'm trying to do my best. However, I have these obstacles. I can't, I have to wear my dress below my knees and I have to wear my pearls and I can't even afford pearls. And because he's about the business, he sees this is a valuable asset to this development that we're having, and let me go in and help you. And so he goes to the colored woman's restroom, and he hits the sign. Let me see, well, even if we don't see the, let's see if we can get towards the end of it. At least it'll be worth seeing the, what he does to show that he, just a second here. So this is where he's tearing down the sign and saying no more colored restrooms, no more white restrooms. Everybody uses the same restroom. So that was the breakthrough that they needed. And I think that is the breakthrough that has to happen in organizations. People who are in the leadership have to be aware of what's going on. And I think as a part of, I think that it's difficult for Black employees, Black female employees specifically, to raise their hand and saying, this is how I'm being discriminated against. This is how, this microaggression has affected me. And so what we're saying is somehow figure out how you can get access to resources available to you. I think it's important to use the EAP services that you have in your company, but also ask your company to use consulting agencies, outplacement agencies, so that all of these other companies who specialize, whether it's in change management, cultural change, doing some type of doing some type of internal investigations within the company or doing some audits. These are things that the company can do to help show their employees that we are serious about our SMART goals. We've put these in place. We want to have measurable and timely results, to go along with what the stance that we've taken. So I think that is, let me look in the chat to see if we have any other comments. So yes, workplace revolution, of course. Janice put in her, the book that she referred to in the chat, 101 Ways to Know That You Are Black in Corporate America. Let's see if there's anything else. You guys, I know we're gonna go over just a couple of minutes, but I wanna give the panelists time to say any of their final thoughts. And again, we just thank you for coming and joining us. This is a time where, the day after a holiday, so we're just excited that you're here. I knew that we were gonna run out of time, and I really apologize for all the little technical difficulties that I've been having. But, if you're not ready to take a bold stand in your organization, perhaps you can do a low-key recommendation, bring in a consultant, speak with some people. It's a really smart move on your part. A lot of times they'll ask HR professionals to do things that they're not qualified for. And we think that you'll be in a better position if you can show, that you have given it some thought and realized, I'm not an expert on this matter. We need to bring in the right people to help us with these types of changes. So just, I'm gonna get to a couple of slides to show you as we go through the final thoughts from our panelists. Janice, if you wouldn't mind going first, please.
So I'm really excited about the Millennial Crew. Thanks, Darren, for participating today. And the reason that I say that is I really feel like a lot of people have made the decision that corporate America is not something they want to do. And I think part of it is because people don't want to jump through the hoops. And so I think that's also driven a lot of people to entrepreneurship. And so for me, entrepreneurship is not my thing. So I have to stay in my lane in corporate America as long as I continue working. But just really excited to hear about some of the things that are going on, and definitely very different from, the 35 years that I've spent in corporate America. I do see change, but I think Darren brought up a really good point that technology is the way it is. I started in tech, have worked in tech, and he's exactly right. You can make six figures for a six month or so boot camp, or depending upon your background. So I think people taking advantage of technology, you'll never be outplaced. Not only if you have your own organization or you're able to be an independent contractor and kind of set your own rules about what, your work life is. So definitely excited about that and look forward to the next session. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Webster, if you could go next, please. You're on mute. Let me see if I can unmute. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I'm on mute. Oh, I just said, as always, thank you for having me. It was It's a pleasure to have the conversation again, of course, with various different perspectives. I think one of the things that, you know, I would like to say as we part, as I've continued to have these conversations about workplace, specifically around Black women, which was really our topic today, what I do know and what I do believe is that all employees have the opportunity to impact culture. And so a lot of times we think that we have to embrace a culture that is handed down to us, but employees do have power and buy-in to what a culture becomes. And so, you know, I encourage individuals to really have those difficult conversations about what's happening in your workplace with people that will listen. So when you talk about those ERGs, those resource networks, being at the right space and in the right place at the right time, talk to, you know, leaders about how are people of color, again, specifically Black women, amid this experiencing the organization, and what are some of the changes that we need to see made in order for us to thrive and to have a seat at the table. And so I'm a big proponent for, Darren called it demand for standing up for oneself. And so I'm a cusper, so not a millennial, I'm on the cusp. And so with that in mind, I would just encourage individuals, you know, if you're in a workplace where the culture is not conducive, if you are one of those Black people that you are tired, you don't want to go back, you don't want to turn on your video camera when it's time for a call, that's something to think about, because that's what work is intended to be for any of us. And so I would encourage you, as Retta said, you know, really get at those tables and be able to help your companies to seek outside consulting. But then also, you know, there's an opportunity for you to really think about whether or not it's a place for you to be. So what is it that you really want to do? How do you want to show up at work? And that's really, you know, where I can help. So anybody that's, you know, looking to have that conversation, you can see the slide here. I'm willing to talk with you about, you know, how you can show up in a way that's authentic to you, not a fit to an organization, but authentic to you, that you can feel like you can be most productive to that organization or go someplace else.
Thank you. Thank you again, Ayana. And Darren, you could go next, please. Why don't I have your screen? Hold on. There we go. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no. So I just thank you for being here. I feel both like really optimistic and super encouraged. But also on my end, just like it's real at the same time. Corporate America still exists, and it's still saturated with people who don't look like us, and definitely people who aren't just not Black, but also they're not women. And so navigating that space, I'll just continue on my end to be as much of an ally and learn and share as much information as I can to my sisters, basically. And yeah, I do feel like there's beauty in this idea of this collective impact that we can have together, our collective voice, as we move forward and represent each other. Yeah, and so with All Black Creatives, you all can check us out online also. We're a community. One of the most beautiful things I think about what we do is we really started off as a community, and we still function very much so as a community now, just more digitally. And so we'll continue to offer that space and safe spaces for our community to gather and just share. We do have a lot of these types of conversations. But then what we've been able to do too is take a lot of these corporate spaces or spaces that are like predominantly white or predominantly male and create pretty much like Black spaces inside of these spaces. And like, so for instance, recently with Adobe, we partnered with them to do an introduction to UX design for our community. So for anybody who was interested, and they said the most people that they had at an event was 60 people, and we had over 200 show up. And it was all Black, and it was beautiful. And so there's like safe spaces to like learn, safe spaces to grow. And that's really what we're trying to do on that end. And then we have an agency side where we really are working with these companies to do way more of the job placement and services side because we are trying to help Black people navigate these types of roadblocks. And so anyway, so I really do just thank you guys for having the opportunity. This was amazing. Janice and Ayana, you guys are amazing. And I'm really grateful to you, Beretta, for being able to be on here.
For sure. Thank you so much. So again, you guys, thank you again. I know that we're running over. Just to remind you, on my website, MANNHRCG, I will be posting this recording as well as sharing out our new sessions that we'll do coming in the coming weeks. And so please join us. You'll also get a survey where we would love to get your feedback. We want to know, what is it that you want to hear? How can we help you? How can we continue to be a resource to you? And then I will just say, welcome to our community. We love to see you again. This has been great. And thank you so much. You guys have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye,
Thank
Yuval.
you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I'm coming.
Sorry. Oh, okay. Let me just cut the Zoom off and then, the recording off, and then